Hello YouTube, this is Hunter Surge with another one of these deck showcases. Today we're going to be going over the newly revealed DZ-BT17 deck, Ominagruzio Fantome. So this is the same list that I featured on my on my short from yesterday. Um, so basics, Ride Line is going to set up 3 triggers in your order zone. If you pull the latter 2 from deck, you get draws off of both of those. So it ends up as a +2 Ride Line. Um, and and all those triggers will, like, basically at the start of each of your battle phases, this grade 1 in the Vanguard or Order Zone will get to choose a number of the trigger icons you have in your gauges, to become 15k power bonuses instead of 10k for the remainder of that turn and the next turn. And then your Vanguard is a restanding Vanguard that gets drive -2, and its drive becomes 1 if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater. The Fantome skill is going to bind a Crimson Moon to paralyze, so it can't intercept or restand on the stand phase. A number of rear guards equal to the number of moons in your bind zone. And then give your front row +5, and if your bind zone has 3 or more Crimson Moons, it's +10 instead. And then from there, the main archetypal card to be aware of is Malefic's Misery Ring Dragon. This card is crazy. Really, really, really good card. It's basically an additional 4 triggers. It's basically a draw trigger. So this is when your Vanguard stands during the battle phase, it gets another 5k power. You can call it out of your damage for EV3, and when it's put into your trigger zone, your Vanguard gets power +5k for the turn, and then if it's your turn, it gets drive +1. If it's your opponent's turn, it draws you a card. Very, very powerful card. Like, so much of the deck's power budget is in this card, and because it's a normal unit and not actually a trigger, there's a lot more stuff you can loop this back into deck with, and that's very clearly an intended piece of the deck because the deck's own rearguard grade 3 Untoward Dragon is able to on place put back a normal unit that has a different name from this card and doesn't have Sentinel. This is also a +5k shield as long as you have a Malefic's Vanguard, so it's never dead, and it has 18k power and also gets Intercept. So, like, it's solid enough body. The ability to put back in your half draw triggers in Misery Ring is like all the power budget of this card, to be honest. Um, and lastly, we have this archetypal 13k booster that is also a bone line, which is pretty cool. Other than that, we're on Planetary Replication as the Regalis piece. Just a very powerful Regalis piece, and this deck's power is really bundled up in its drive check related stuff, so you really want to help ensure that your drive checks are actually going off properly. So the additional scry from Planetary Replication is very, very powerful for this deck. The rest of the archetypal cards aren't that good. Like this grade 1 that when discard you sold last one to call as a 10k booster, not very good. This what else? This grade 2 that Carablast 1 draw card gets +5k is okay, but generally speaking, Alrest is better. Even though you can't really Alrest off of a moon, it's still an overall better card. And when you guard with this, you can Soul Blast 1 for either 10k shield or 15k shield, depending on how far along in the game you are. However, because the Ride Line eats all of its own souls, sending themselves to Order Zone, it takes a while for this to get properly online. So I don't think it's very good because of that. And we got some more cards in the cards of the day. We got this grade 2 that gets +5k every time your drive check reveals a trigger or a misery wing, but you need to see 2 for it to surpass Alrest, so I don't think that's good enough. And we have this grade 1 Dark Arts Dragon that is able to choose a face-up trigger from your damage zone, put into drop, and then you put a card from your drop into your damage zone. The idea with this is to put Malefic's Misery Wing Dragon back in your damage zone so that you can call it out with its effect. But I don't think that's very good. Because like, basically, in my opinion, if Misery Wing is in your drop zone, I want to be putting it back into my deck. immediately. I want to be calling Untoward and putting it back in. And if you were to put this, like, any slots you could dedicate to this grade 1 would be better dedicated to other potential tech cards you could run to do this same function. Like, there are more cards than just this that are able to do this that I think might be worth pursuing. We'll talk about like other possible changes to the deck after the replays. But yeah, that's the basic breakdown. We're on 4 Margarets, 4 Rudbeckias, because the in-archetype cards just aren't that good. So we really need the generic Fantome engine shoring things up. Thank God we have a really, really solid grade 3 to lean on. And yeah, that's basically it. Let's get into the games. Yeah. All right. So getting into replays, the first one is against Amon, the new Amon encounter deck from DZ-15. Um, real quick note. These replays, my friend Athorna helped me get these before the cards were actually properly up on Cardfight Connect, which is why they're all custom cards. Big thanks to him for that. But some of these replays might look a bit messy because there were some takebacks happening at various points in the games. But like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So we have a very strong opening hand here. Misery Ring is going to go right back, but we have Planetary Replication in the opener, which is very strong, and we also have Rudbeckia, who we always love seeing as much as we can. Yeah. So we're going to send those back. We draw an Untoward, which is pretty nice, and then we draw Margaret for turn, which is really nice. Now, this might have not been the exact correct line to do. As you'll see in my other replays, often what I'm doing is on turn 1, I'm discarding a crit if I have one in hand, throwing that into my Aura Zone from the drop with the grade 1 on place effect, and then taking from deck for the grade 2s 2 activations. Because the Great Shoes, when it takes from deck, draws you a card. But the one for the grade 1 activation is it only draws if you put from hand. And I actually think I put from hand here, but basically, like, you want to minimize how many triggers you're taking out the deck while doing your setup. So yeah. Do, 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 do. But we go for a Rudbeckia, we whiff, and we Planetary Replication, putting a misery wing on top of our deck, which is really awesome. We end up getting credit there, which is not ideal, but this is still pretty good value for us. We're not going to be able to. We're going to dump a Margaret off the Planetary Replication, and that gets us to our front. And that's going to let us put on a lot of pressure very, very quickly, which is very nice. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to intercept away this Aurus that was called off Moon, since we don't really want to keep it on the board too bad. And we want to clear out the space for us to call it this Misery Wing, so that we can intercept it and then later put it back with Untoward. Like, that is the main value of the Damage Zone effect, the fact that, like, Misery Wing is not a particularly good body. It is not a body that we're really aiming to have on our end boards. And we flip a double crit here. In part due to Planetary Replication. Yeah. And like, that was like a 40k guard, and like under normal circumstances that would not be a break. But 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 because each of our triggers is getting an additional 5k, that is a break. And like, even with one trigger, that was going to be like a hard press scenario, because like we're gonna swing again, put them to what, 4, and then they have like no shield to guard the other 2 swings that are like decently sizable. So yeah. With that said, let us move on to the next replay. Next replay is against Kaikon. So again, we have the Planetary Replication opener, and we have a Margaret in the opener, so this is pretty good for our early game, for our discards at least, for keeping up our card advantage. We end up mulliganing into a Misery Ring, which is not ideal. But we can just discard that away and get to an untoward, and we'll be fine. So we discard a crit for our turn 1, and we're doing the line I was talking about last game, where we are attempting to discard a trigger so that we can put that in with from drop without losing, like, yeah, and save the market for a later turn. We get a heal off the planetary replication. We leave that on top because, like, we're not really getting value out of that heal. But it still shields in the hand, so, like, it's fine. It's fine. That's all fine and good. So pretty solid early game Kai formation. Not the strongest one, but like still pretty pressuring. We end up using 2 triggers here. But our 2 damage here is a Crimson Moon and a Misery Wing. So we have a free body out of damage, which is always very nice. Like that part of the card is super cool. Like we just randomly get, yeah, we damage a draw, we get a draw trigger, and then we also get a free body out of damage, which is really nice. It's really nice. Even if it's not an ideal body, like, it's really nice. It's not something you want to go out of your way to set up with, like, that new grade 1, but it's still, like, a valuable effect to have. So we get another Margaret. So we have that set up for our turn 3. On this turn, we are giving the bonus to the crit because, actually, no, because we have 1 second here, we get to give it to both in this scenario. Often what I'm doing is I'm setting up a crit first and giving that to that when my opponent's only on grade 1. And then whether I give it to front or heel will basically be based on which trigger I have more of in my deck. Still at that point. So we rip a front. Thank you, Planetary Replication, which gives us a pretty solid amount of pressure here. We're gonna OT to pass the Overlord. And then they have they did draw like any grade 2, so they have a very middling turn 3. We're gonna discard Margaret, get our Crimson Moon, and set up our last trigger in the gauge. And now we're just gonna go full formation. Untoward will send back the Misery Wing. Really awesome. And we will get our full 3 drive checks here. We're gonna paralyze one of these Nasrudans, the one that's already down. Swing at Van, hit a crit. And then we're gonna, this is awesome. So we hit this is really nice. Like, we get PG'd here, but we get on the second drive check with one drive, we hit Misery Wing into PG. We don't get any triggers, but we get a ton of shield value off that, and we have all 4 PGs available to us. Really awesome. They're going to guard the Untoward and take the Aurus, and it's over to them. They have a more real turn this time. It's the double persona. They have Nahalem. They get into Beliacro. So it's much more real here. It's 43. We're gonna spend, the plan here is to spend 2 PGs on these Overlord swings, and then take the others depending on the scenario. But on the second swing, they rip OT after ripping heal on the first, and then it's front crit. This is very troubling for us. Yeah, we end up using the OT in our hand that I believe Margaret drew us into to keep ourselves from dying. But this is a very rough situation. We can at least force them to have to replace their front rows, which can stymie their output. And we do have 2 PGs, so it might not be the worst. We hit front and a moon, and we hit a Margaret. So that Margaret can turn into something else, which is pretty cool. And these are high numbers. These are high numbers we're getting off that plus 15k front. But they're on low damage, so they can just take it with no problem. They go into Vortex because we're at 5. This is the point of the game where you go for Vortex. Untoward will die. And we just have to bet on a 6 damage heal. At this point in the game, all right, we'll just go back here. At this point in the game, I had 2 heals in my 11 card deck. So the odds aren't like exactly in my favor, but I still have a pretty good like 20% chance of just ripping a heal here. So I'm like, I can't live this without a heal. So I'm just going to take this first swing and see where we get. And we get a heal there, and getting plus 15k off that heal means we can just guard this next attack with just a single trigger. Then we're going to go Margaret, intercept with this back row, and use another heal that we drew off Margaret. And now we just PG the last 2 swings. And suddenly we are in a much, much better position. We get to Persona Ride once again, call Misery Ring, which is not ideal, but that gets us our attackers. We flip, we see a crit off Planetary. They attempt to, they guard, that does successfully guard us, but the rest of the turn is, is a bit much. With a damage trigger, they would have been able to card. I'm pretty sure. Those drive checks were crazy, by the way. I just want to go back on that. Okay. These drive checks, so here we see a crit, a non-trigger, and then another non-trigger. Um, and at this point, I have one more crit in the deck, but I also have two, two Misery Wings still in the deck in the 7 card deck. So more than half of my deck remaining were hits, and I only saw one. Crazy low roll on that specific turn, honestly. But we still get the win, so it's fine. And the last game for demonstration is going to be up against Deep Lands. So we don't have a planetary opener this time. We have Double Margaret, which is pretty alright. So we're just going to toss back everything except for Margaret, I believe. No, we keep a crit as well. Yeah, we keep a crit as well because we want to discard the crit on our turn 1. This might not be the correct line, but this is the line that feels pretty solid to me. In my playtime with the deck so far. But it is a bit complicated, how exactly you want to handle the flaws of this ride line, how you want to approach it. And this is just the approach I've come to feeling pretty comfortable with. Discarding a high shield value trigger in the early game does feel pretty bad, but I think it works out well enough. So we're gonna OT to pass the Vanguard swing, and then we're gonna Margaret the Orgody, since we already have a third Margaret in hand, to discard. So we just get a free guard on that Orgody, which is pretty nice. And we're just going to go with a bunch of grade 1s on this turn because this column is still going to be hitting 26. So it's still pretty solid numbers. We're going to go 18 on Van. We hit Misery Wing. But the rest of this hand is really not good. This is a very scary scenario going into Deep Lands because we have very little shield in this hand. Triple Persona Ride is not where I want to be. Getting some decent damage at the very least. And we're going to shove one of the Ill Buildings spins into Soul so that Rudbeckia is fully online and we can, at least one of these is fully online. But realistically, I didn't want to do both of them because realistically, one of these Rudbeckias is likely getting paralyzed. So but they're going to paralyze the Misery Ring instead. I didn't agree with this line, but Crit Heal is really, really brutal at this moment. A lot of our progress gets undone with him back to 2 damage. But because 15k triggers are pretty sick, the this column just gets completely blanked because it isn't quite high enough. And we just get to 5k guard the other side, which is pretty cool. We will call over the Misery Wing with another Misery Wing, and then we'll call Untoward to shuffle back in the Misery Wing, paralyze the 2 rears, and then we're just going to go in for face, flip a crit and a heal, so we return the favor. That's pretty good. And this Vanguard column just gets massive when you see triggers at all. We didn't even assign both these triggers to the Vanguard. We assigned one of them to the rears because the Vanguard was already at 43 with a drive check. So they guard through the turn, living on 4. However, their next turn is really stunted. They have Persona Ride, um, but uh, but they don't have an order. He has somehow bricked on finding another call, which is crazy. I never see that happen with deep lands. Um, but we still have to deal with a 6 attack turn here. It's nowhere near as pressuring as it normally would be. But our hand was still pretty low. Like we were actually cooked here if we didn't if we damaged a Misery Wing here, and that Misery Wing got us into an Elder Breath. If that did not happen, we probably lost. we were probably cooked if that did not happen. So we go for another Rudbeckia. Um, Establish our rest, get another untoward out to throw back another misery wing, and we have plus 10k to our front row now. And we flip crit heal again. Like, that's a bit sacky, I cannot lie. I do not think this deck will generally beat deep lands, but it is what it is. And we're back with the deck. So one thing I do want to touch on is you might have seen this going around. At current, the way that Misery Wing is written is it doesn't actually work the way Persia probably intended to work, because it's a combination of two factors. Ominagruzio gives itself -2 drive until end of turn, and then makes its drive 1. Um, and then Misery Wing is until end of battle. The problem that arises here is that is that because this expiring always has to happen after you use the auto end of battle effect of Ominagruzio. What technically happens under the rules at current is if you check a Misery Wing during your first battle with Ominagruzio, and your opponent's on grade 3, so you go to 3 drives, you get -2 drives, you go to 1, and then the +1 drive falls off, and you go to 0. That is obviously not how Bushrod intended it to work. I've been testing with the assumption that Bushrod is going to apply some sort of fix to this. None of the games that we actually ended up showing today had an instance where that actually mattered, but it is something I do want you to be aware of, just in case it doesn't get fixed, but I am pretty sure they're going to fix this. Now, with that said, this deck is like very subtly strong. Like Misery Wing's existence, once your opponent is aware of it, just changes like all of the defensive math about guarding a Vanguard swing. Because, like, for example, if you're going for a 1 to pass on the run drive swing, well, you have to go 10k over now, right? Because Misery Wing um will break if you do a typical 1 to pass with only 5 over. And it similarly makes it so that like a 2 to pass is like a typical 2 to pass that's 15k over will actually be a trigger plus a misery wing to well, actually the 15k already changes that to that. But like if you go like 20k over, it's now like, oh, it's misery wing and a trigger to break that, right? Stuff like that. And of course, as a restanding Vanguard deck, you're heavily incentivized to commit triggers to your Vanguard circle. So that works out. Like there's a lot of like extra pressure on your Vanguard swing. I do find the deck is still a bit dependent on actually hitting triggers to be powerful. Um, but Misery Wing is an extraordinarily powerful card. Like getting 4 additional mini triggers that you have a much easier time shuffling back into your deck, reusing over and over. Its application as a damage trigger draw is extremely powerful. Very, very good stuff. Yeah, there's stuff here for sure. The problem is most of the archetypal cards suck. Most of the archetypal cards are very, very, very weak. So that hamstrings the deck quite a lot. It is the first Brandgate deck that actually wants Margaret because it has a hard time like generating the card advantage it needs in the early game without that. Now there's a couple cards I think that are worth considering. So let's go over those real quick. First up is the Keter and Brandgate Dual Nation, Valtrosa and Liel. This will be able to counterblast 1, look top 5 to call something. Can even get a moon, which is pretty sick. But on top of that, it is another card that is able to put normal units back into your deck. So it is more ways for you to get your Misery Wings back into the deck. The biggest problem with this card is it doesn't work off of Moon, and you already have Alrest in the deck, and it is not the quality attacker that Alrest is. Like, Alrest is getting plus 10k overall, and that really helps shore up our numbers. Liel has no power gain, and thus can't really help us shore up our numbers at all. So I don't think Valtrosa is quite the road. However, another one that I think is definitely worth considering is Secondel, the Obliging Monster. This is a card that sometimes see play in Ava decks. When it's placed on rear, you choose a non-trigger unit from your drop, and you put on the bottom of your deck. And if you put a grade 3 or greater card, you Soul Blast 3 and draw a card. It doesn't immediately shuffle, like Valtrosa and Untoward do. But it is still another way of getting Misery Rings into the deck, and with the Moon stuff running around, it's not too difficult to maneuver yourself into a position where you get a shuffle, right? So I think this could be worthwhile, especially because I have not found Ill-Boding Spine super necessary. The Soul Gain is fairly useful for getting Rudbeckia online for its full shield value, but you don't really need the Counterblast, I find. You're not really starved for Counterblast in any way. You're always using energy for the guard effect of Margaret and Soul for the discard effect. So you're not really starving for Counterblast. Not really something I'm really concerned about. Yeah, Secondel, pretty solid card. Could go in that second booster slot as another thing that can put back our copies of Misery Wing, and can do that while being called off of Moon, which is something that does not apply to Valtrosa. One other thing is, I think Untoward should probably be at 4. I had 3 in this first draft, but I think this card should probably be at 4. So much of the deck's power is bound up in Misery Ring and your ability to put it back, and Untoward is your in-archetype, pretty solid attacker way of doing that. So I think this card should probably be a 4 of. I'm not sure what the cut is, but I think it should be a 4 of. And the last card I wanted to touch on was Crorius Dam, from a previous, well, I think this was last year's festival booster, is a card I can entertain, because this is a constant shield plus 5k. It has intercept as well. It's another grade 3 that we can get off of Rudbeckia, which is pretty cool. And it's just a simple on attack, your Energy Blast 3, which isn't a resource you really use in this deck, to bind one of your opponent's rears, and then it gets power plus 5k, and if your damage zone has 4 more cards, or your Persona Boat this turn, it gets another power plus 5k, and your opponent can't play Blitz Orders. Like, I think this is a solid enough card that I could entertain in the deck, given the value of grade 3s for cards with Rudbeckia. But I'm not sure where exactly his thoughts are, and I think his thoughts are probably better spent on more ways to put back Misery Wing. Actually, one last card to touch on is if you don't feel the need for more ways to put Misery Wing back in your deck, then Blazelges is of course a good secondary grade 1 to run in place of Ill-Boding Spine. Yeah. And that's going to be it for the deck. I was more impressed with this deck than I expected to be. I do think it's still pretty mid and very RNG dependent to really get out its full power, but there's a lot of like subtle, constantly present advantages this deck has. And like Misery Ring is just a very, very powerful card. So I think this could be like a solid like tier 3 like rogue deck. But I don't think it's not going to be like a top competitive deck by any stretch.